Some games demand you mash buttons and whack as many bad guys as possible. Other games are a bit more thoughtful, requiring patience and perseverance. Those are all well and good when you're in the mood, but when you're in the mood for a game that serves up nothing but hard-hitting combat, well, you don't want to waste your time on anything else. Today on this video, we have 15 games that are absolutely nothing but combat. Starting off with number 15, it's Max Payne 3. Yeah, starting off with one of Rockstar's most misunderstood games, but it's one of those games that has only gotten better and better in hindsight. Max Payne 3 is a game that is unlike anything else. The technical wizardry on display here is still impressive, even over a decade after release. All those game-defining things like destructible environments and animations and expanded bullet time things are all things that we can't actually talk about right now. We don't have time right now. What we're here to talk about, of course, is the combat, and it's absolutely non-stop. There are a lot of reasons to love the third Max Payne game, but some people can find the game to be a bit exhausting to deal with because compared to the first two, they're an almost gritty noir story. Max Payne 3 is more of a constant meat grinder of enemies just relentlessly hounding the player. There's very little time to breathe in this game in comparison. There are absolutely zero walking simulator sections, zero puzzles, or anything of that kind. The story sequences are relatively brief in comparison to the games that came before. Part 1 and Part 2 at least attempted to pace out the action by introducing dreams and puzzles and extended story sequences, but here in 3, it's wall-to-wall combat, only broken up with the occasional show-off scene like the home invasion shootout here. If you're like most of us who played these games just for the combat, then you're in luck. There's a lot of it here. Next, down at number 14, we got Bulletstorm. Bulletstorm is one of the most underrated first-person shooters. That might feel like a hot take, but I think a lot of people agree. It's not necessarily a game that's only combat. There are still plenty of games that focus even more on the shooting and the action than this one, but I won't lie, we just wanted an excuse to talk about Bulletstorm more. It just rolls shooting, gameplay, environment, silliness, all that. The game's actual shooty-shoot stuff is more broken up than something like a serious Sam or Painkiller. Those games are pure, non-stop battle simulator stuff. Here in Bulletstorm, the action is broken up a little with some brief moments of puzzle platforming here or a slow walk and talk, and those things would be considered cardinal sins for stopping the gameplay, but here they're brief, it's kind of moving things along. For the most part, Bulletstorm is just non-stop shooting and kicking, and not just enemies, but everything around you. It's a big, interactive playset of a game. Highfalutin developers will wax poetic about narrative, combat, or whatever, and we eat that crap up too. We get into all that, but sometimes it's really fun to just get a high score for shooting a guy in the butt, and Bulletstorm is absolutely swimming in silly stuff like that. Again, a criminally underrated game, just needed an excuse to give it a shout. Next, down at number 13, of course, I had to mention Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. This is a game that's sometimes mistakenly identified as a button masher type action game, at least by people who don't know what they're talking about. The simple fact is that the combat is actually pretty complex. It's essentially Batman Arkham combat cranked up to 11 essentially, with a lot of different moves, options, upgrades, more enemies, bigger battles, you name it. It actually makes for a really satisfying action game once you get the hang of it, and it's definitely one of the biggest selling points of Shadow of Mordor. Another thing that makes this game an unstoppable momentum juggernaut is the fact that there really isn't a lot of stuff that isn't combat. Sure, you can technically call stealth not combat, but it's more like pre-combat, because most of the time this is how it's usually going to end up. You're going to blow your cover, or you're going to want to blow your cover because you want to fight. There's nothing stopping you from charging into every mission swinging swords, and 2 of them at the start of the game, the first couple of missions. There's a story slowing things down a little, but after that, it's off to the races. There's a lot of content in this game, and you can chop through enemy after enemy non-stop, no problem. With Shadow of War, some other stuff did return like gear and loot and all of that, and you kind of are forced to deal with more of that than actually just fighting, but if you liked Mordor for the fighting, well, Mordor has all the fighting you can handle. And by the way, there's a whole lot of DLC if you need even more. Next, at number 12, we have Sifu. Let's slow things down a little bit and talk about a game with combat a little more deliberately paced, and that game is Sifu. Like the best pure action games, there's a lot more depth to the fighting than it initially appears to be. It's not just button mashing to win, it's all about timing and figuring out what the best moves to use here to best each enemy type. It's not a short game, it's just not a long one either. There are only 5 stages total, so it can be arguably be a short game, but the amount of time it's going to take you to beat it for the average player, you know, with the time it takes to practice and actually get good, might take you over 9 to 11 hours. Fighting is all there is. There are no puzzles between encounters or climbing sections to space things out. There are collectibles to find, but they're quick and simple to get your hands on. They're not your typical video game collectathon. There's no stops, no build-up before a big set piece. It's just fight after fight, hour after hour, until the end of the game. There is this crazy dopamine hit though. You never want to stop playing this game because you need to master one area and then you need to master the next. So you're like, all right, to master the next one, I gotta go back and keep practicing on the first one. It's a crazy addictive loop and it's a combat-only game. Now at number 11, we've got Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Easily the most combat-heavy of the Soulsborne type games. For one reason, they completely cut the RPG mechanics out except for some minor upgrades, so it's entirely possible to beat the game and beat every boss without leveling up at all or any equipment changes, and I mean that literally. You can beat that whole game with nothing but your weak sword and the deflect button if you're just really good. I mean, not being hit gives you no reason to actually upgrade. You get what I'm saying? In between all the boss fights is stealth stuff. It's technically a non-combat option, but the simple fact is the stealth in this game is kind of a joke. All it really does is pad out the time between encounters and make it so that you don't have to deal with all the henchman-type enemies in the area before getting into the good stuff. Combat is obviously the main focus. At least half of the sub-bosses cannot be stealthed, the good ones anyway, and then there are bosses like Guardian Ape where you can't just rush them down and then deflect their attacks and counter them. There's nothing to really hide from to pad the fight out. There are only 2 boss types in the entire game, basically the people, which are the good boss fights, and then there are all the monsters, which only exist, it seems, to make your life miserable. It adds variety, but it also messes with the smooth rhythm of the combat in a way that is really smart. When the game is at its best, it's just one constant rhythm: attack, block, deflect, counter. And for whatever reason, it never gets old. What little non-combat things they found to pad out the gameplay, while great, still make the combat feel much more impactful when you actually get into it. Next, over at number 10, we're talking about Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. This is an interesting one because from moment to moment, there is a lot of combat, but there are also a lot of interruptions. A cutscene will start any side activities, or there are brief moments between wars, like the story pacing of the game. If you enjoyed the action from the Gears of War's game, Space Marine 2 will surely give you almost the same vibe. You have a lot of shooting, action, and a damn fine battles. One thing you don't really notice when you're playing is that there's no silent corridor crawling. You know, in most shooters, you're spending minutes at a time doing absolutely nothing but moving to the next combat area, and it's especially true with certain shooters, and I'm looking strictly at those Homefront games where you're just doing nothing, walking and talking through empty corridors. Here in Space Marine 2, there's none of that. If you're moving through a corridor, it's because you're moving to the next combat area, and it never takes more than 30 seconds. The only exception is when you're walking back with your bros, but there's still stuff happening there to keep your attention. For you thrill seekers out there, finishers are even faster in this one, so you're not even taking those brief breaks to watch the massacre unfold. Killing blows are quick and extremely vicious in Space Marine 2, so even those don't interrupt the action for long. It's one of those things you don't notice when you play it. This game just goes. Next, down at number 9, we have Bayonetta. Sure, this is a pure action game. It's probably more fair to say that the combat is fast and ferocious and pretty constant. It being a Platinum Games game, there are a few interruptions. Sometimes they like to jack a vehicle in there once in a while, or a completely off-the-wall diversion. But when it comes to Bayonetta, and keep in mind, I'm talking about the first game specifically, there really isn't a lot to keep you away from the combat in this one. It's a pure action game in the vein of Devil May Cry, so you get exposure to what you expect from that. There is a central base where you can buy upgrades and change equipment and do all the inventory management stuff. That kind of slows it down, but all menial tasks are done very quickly, and it's fun. The Bayonetta games are in a constant rush to get to the next fight. Usually once you're out of the intro in these games, you're doing some serious fighting, then, like I mentioned, on a motorcycle, or you're walking up a wall, or you're going through portals into Inferno, or otherwise doing completely insane things regularly, but half of those things are happening while you're fighting. They're not divorced from the gameplay. They're actually enhancing it as they break up the usual pattern of arenas and then lock doors that populate games like this. Coming in next at number 8, of course, Devil May Cry 5. Kind of just like Bayonetta, a pure action game. No escalation or world building to break things up, just non-stop fighting. In pure Devil May Cry fashion, after a brief story setup, the game gets right into it. There's no toying around. An insane chase that is happening. All kinds of insane stuff happens. Tons of characters are introduced. And then after that, the pedal never lets up. The game just goes full force to the end. Normally, stuff like the cave levels in Devil May Cry 4, where you are wandering around, not really doing much other than trying to figure out where to go next, would bog down the action. And it kind of did in that game, and then you had to play the whole game twice over. So while Devil May Cry 5 has some branching and backtracking on occasion, you're mostly just trucking forward through enemy after enemy, fight after awesome fight without missing a beat. Stuff that would have been a big story dump in the previous games might be explained on the tops of rooftops while you're running through the game as a completely different character, so you're getting some bit of story, but the player is in a whole different section of the game fighting. This is just a non-stop thrill ride, and the second you're done with it, you're probably just going to want to start it over again. Next on the list at number 7, we have Ghost of Tsushima. This might sound like an odd one, but consider this. Think about the game. What do you actually do in the game? The exploration is basically just going from place to place. Sure, there's the story that takes up a good amount of time, but think about what the story missions actually are. You're either sneaking around or you're fighting, and once you're past the intro of the game, which does act as a slow burn, they throw more story and build up there. Slow down the combat to properly introduce the world. And I mean, it's an open world game. It's a pretty standard structure, but an open world game where the only thing there is to do is fight and fight and fight and fight. Think about the combat encounters, then you start with a little duel or something here, or fight, and then through story scenes you meet allies, which then take you to where the fighting actually happens, and then you fight, and that's all there really is to the game after the intro. Of course, the self-contained samurai duels is a great example of a fight where there is no preamble. It's just pure combat one-on-one, and they're some of the best parts of the game. You can actually get into them pretty early on, so if you want to bypass any of that other extra fat we're talking about, you can engage in these combat situations. So an open world game shouldn't somehow feel like pure combat, but it does. You're either driving between the combat encounters or you're doing the encounters. I'll admit I'm being a little unfair here. There is still a lot of exploration and exposition and story, but almost nothing that gets in the way of the violence. You can tell Sucker Punch was eager to get you into a fight, so they're never far away. Close, if not far, whatever. They're just always presenting you with something to tackle. Over at number 6, as much as I love these next-gen God of War games, there's no other God of War game that tops the combat action in God of War 3. This is the action game where Kratos frankly goes on an absolute unstoppable revenge rampage through mythological Greece, killing basically everything that shows his stupid face. He's like a meteor of pure rage, just plowing through established characters from previous games now like they're minor bosses, and there are very few things that can even slow him down. There is combat and platforming in God of War 3. For full disclosure, the two things to do are both pretty constant throughout the game, but the combat so overwhelms the platforming in terms of length that it feels like the game's non-stop fighting, because these fights are long. It's not like all previous God of Wars where fights are just 2 or 3 encounters where a door locks, you have your fight, and then it's done. These things go on, sometimes for like 10 minutes at a time. By the time it's near the end, the amount of stuff to kill seemingly doubles. What's more, there is no room to breathe in these fights. Enemies don't wait their turn. You're constantly under siege by multiple things. All of them can kill you in like 2 or 3 shots. It makes every fight feel like a knockout, drag-out affair. And it's not frustrating because the combat here is great, but if you're not paying attention, you're going to eat dirt before you know it.
Get on!
Moving down to number 5, of course, we have Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. We almost forgot about this one, but man, it makes a lot of sense, right? Think about it. Combat, combat, combat. There is a real story here too. They actually made it, weirdly enough, looks, sounds, and feels like a Metal Gear game, but without all the open world or stealth or creeping or overly long cutscenes or talky-talk support conversations. All that's gone or very minimized here. That is quite an accomplishment, and it wouldn't surprise us to hear about this being a rare combat-only game in that a lot of people actually pay attention to the story because there's actual enough of it there to get you through the journey without bogging things down. The pacing here is excellent. There's a lot of story for these types of games, but there's still barely any in comparison to a regular Metal Gear Solid game. The combat's kind of non-stop and it's varied. It's with normal encounters, personal duels, large-scale brawls, big set piece. This game has it all. The main negative against it is the length. A lot of people who played the game only played the first 2 chapters because they were still trying to return the game for a refund for the third, but those issues are long and are past. The game still holds up. There's bonus stuff like VR missions and other things to give you more to do, but we'd love to see a new full-scale game. There's got to be a sequel to this, right? Now that we're so far away, Metal Gear Revengeance deserves another game. Over at number 4, we have Ultrakill. This is an indie first-person shooter that is inspired by old-school shooters. Those games are pretty combat-heavy as it is, but then you get to something like this thing, and it really puts things into perspective. Ultrakill is exactly as the title suggests. There is nothing but combat in this game. There is no ramping up. Things start insane, and they only get even more insane from there. The game does not give you a chance to breathe. Any chance you may possibly have to catch your breath while trying to figure out an encounter, boom, there's another one right after it. The levels are not like Quake or Doom where it's about exploration and discovery. It's more like an arcade game or a rolling checkpoint, drop-in combat environment that you have to fight through to get to the end. It's basically a bunch of rooms in an abstract environment. The game never goes 30 seconds without putting a fight in front of you. There is just no let-up. You know, this one, a word of caution. It may not totally be for the faint of heart. So if you're the type of person who's going to get an anxiety attack just from watching this thing, maybe skip it. But if you want pure, unfiltered combat with zero filler, this one is your ticket. There is something really compelling to it. If you love just the act of fighting in a video game, this one, you can't beat it. It's probably one of the most intense, adrenaline-pumping experiences in gaming history. At number 3, while I do love the newly released Doom: The Dark Ages, I will still pick Eternal over that because the feeling of action from this game is really insane. It expands the simple but satisfying Doom 2016 and actually manages to largely eliminate the gaps between combat encounters, mostly by just speeding everything up. One of the only things dragging things down about the previous game was the speed of movement. Walking speed was fine for most things, but it didn't give you the same sense of speed and momentum that Eternal has, and now you have a dash, a double jump, and a grappling hook on a shotgun. It adds up to make a game that feels like you're always in motion. You'll get into an arena fight, wipe them out, and then you're on to the next arena fight, wiping them out. Yeah, there are still some setups where you're doing light platforming or whatever, but the movement speed is so fast that it's over before you even have time to think about it. It's not even that the shooting in Doom Eternal is constant, it's the fact that you feel like you're always going somewhere and doing something. This game has some serious momentum behind it. Everything about it is so quick, and the combat hits so damn hard that it's easy to forget when you stop to breathe. By the time you're done with the game, you'll feel like you played something with non-stop action, even if there is a little light platforming or exploration. The game is so fast and so snappy that everything just kind of fades in your mind to the fighting. You'll just dream of the crazy fights. Next, down at number 2, we have Black Myth Wukong. Well, it took years for them to release this game after announcing it and teasing it, but the debut game from Chinese developer Game Science released last year, and part of its success, from my point of view, is the pacing. The game just goes from one intense encounter to the next. A lot of it is like a Souls game, but imagine all the running around and exploring that missions and levels would have, and then just trim it down to the bare essentials. It's primarily a linear game, but the actual things that you do in between all the boss fights and weird mini games and story stuff is pretty minimal. Not to say you'll finish the game in 5 hours or anything. It still takes a respectable 35 or so hours for decent players to beat the game. There's tons of fighting, and the fights take time, and they're deliberative, but they're just really constant because they take time. Talking about non-stop action makes it sound like this is constant Twitch-focused style stuff, but for the most part, this game is methodical and calculating, just with very little downtime between all of it. There are exploration areas, but like I said, they're there. Half of these fights are full-blown playable cinematic events with these encounters like the Sun Wukong at the end. They really are full-on thrill ride type exhilarating experiences with story building on top of it. This game really just kind of keeps throwing stuff at you, manages to keep itself interesting with varied fights of all different scales. Quite honestly, this is an incredible combat-focused game. Down at number 1, if you want a game that's nothing but fights, let me introduce to you the first Berserker, Khazan. This game does not have a single puzzle outside of figuring out the crazy brutal enemies and boss fights. This is one of the most brutal games out there. At times, it can feel a little simple, but it takes and extrapolates from things like Sekiro and swordplay from other games, and it adds multiple stances to it, different weapons, customization, more movement, spears, a whole upgrade system. I can go on and on about this game for a while. You get it. That might just be our brains kind of broken from overexposure to other similar games, but we think, this game definitely is influenced by a lot of stuff. But that might be the comparison point that makes some people understand what they're getting here. Non-stop, brutal combat. There are crazy techniques to master, insane fights, giant monsters to deflect with perfect timing, and that's most of what a game like this can offer. And it offers it again in spades. There is a story, there is loot, but all that stuff is pretty secondary compared to killing everything that stands in your way. They've kind of figured something out with this pacing like Black Myth Wukong. This one condenses a supposedly 80-hour experience down to like 30-ish hours. They've done something here to keep the pace brisk, but not making the game actually feel too short. You get in a good rhythm with these fights, and it is absolutely killer.